Hi, my name is Nathan Cope from nathancope.com. In this lecture, we'll be talking about choosing components based on requirements. With all the different brands and models of computer parts available in the wild, it can be a daunting task figuring out which ones to get. It's even more daunting if you have a specific task for your computer in mind, but don't know which components should perform the best for those tasks. In this lecture, we're going to tackle those problems to make it easier to decide which parts to buy. Let's start by defining some tasks and figuring out which components should have higher performance than the others so that the task in question can be completed without any headaches. So our first system will be used for lots of things, general usage and internet browsing. This is the most common system for obvious reasons, and it'll be our first system build. You have a lot of wiggle room in component choice for a general usage system. However, to make the computer enjoyable to use and to accomplish general tasks in a short amount of time, I would recommend not buying the cheapest of the cheap to get the best deal. If task productivity is important to you, then this factor is especially important. We also want your computer to be viable for more than just a couple of years. A general usage system's components should be middle ground across the board. My discussion earlier about shopping for a CPU uses that thought process, and we'll talk a bit more about this when we choose our components for our first system later on. Next up is gaming. This is an easy one. Gaming and 3D games require higher-end video cards to process and display the 3D worlds, and to allow for an enjoyable experience in the game with high refresh rates on the screen. Nobody likes playing a beautiful 3D game that jumps and lags because the system is struggling to keep up. Gaming doesn't necessarily need a top-of-the-line processor. Some people may disagree with me, however, the majority of the work for your games are done by the video card, not the CPU. In fact, some games allow you to move even more processing functions over to the graphics card for even better performance. Memory is important due to the size of game files, especially imagery. At this time, I recommend a general system to have 8 gigs of RAM for a nice experience, but I would double this for gaming at 16 gigabytes. Hard disk speed and access time is important if you don't like loading times, but if you don't mind waiting longer between levels where the game may load data, you can skimp on this and get a spindle hard disk. However, I do still recommend an SSD for all systems. The issue with that recommendation, though, is that SSDs are more expensive than spindle hard drives, and game data is usually quite large and may fill up the drive quickly. A solution to this is to use the smaller SSD purely for your operating system files and buy a secondary large spindle drive, which is much cheaper, for your personal files and for game installations. That way, the system will be able to run the OS quickly and won't make the game suffer any performance when doing so. Next, let's look at a system built for programming. Programming in itself does not require a lot of processing power. When I say programming, I mean typing in the text of your program. However, when compiling your program, the system has to access hundreds and perhaps even thousands of small files to build your program. Because of that fact, you will need a strong CPU and a fast hard disk. Programmers will also tend to use virtual machines to test their programs, so lots of memory is a requirement as well. Let's talk about those VMs next. A VM is a virtual machine by definition. It's a system within a system. In other words, you could be running Windows but have another operating system like Linux running in its own sandbox or its own window. VMs require a ton of resources. Whenever a VM is run, it splits the resources of your computer amongst the VMs that are running. Because of this, VM host systems need lots and lots of CPU processing power, memory, and hard disk speed. What you can skimp on in this case of VMs is video card performance. For the most part, VMs aren't used for gaming or other video type tasks. Now let's take a look at video processing or creation. If the system is planned to be used mostly for video creation and editing, you'll need lots and lots of hard disk space. That's the most important part in the case of video editing because videos are generally large files. That said, editing can take time to process. So if you're looking for video editing to happen faster, and for exports and conversions of video to happen faster as well, a good CPU is also recommended. In my opinion, the rest of the components don't matter too much. In this case, you can stick with mid-grade components for the rest. Let's take a look at home theater systems. Building your own home theater system is currently one of the more common reasons why someone would want to build their own PC. In the case of home theaters, a new paradigm comes into play for some people, and that's the case itself of the computer. Generally, you want your living room devices to all kind of look the same and be the same size. So there is a sort of home theater sized case that you could use for this type of system for it to not look like an eyesore in your living room. Other than that, hard disks I think are the most important component for this. A home theater is a system that will hold all your videos and movies. Obviously, those are quite large. So having large hard disks is pretty much required. In this case, I do not think SSDs are necessary, however. Videos don't need high transfer rates to get from the disk to the screen without a delay, so normal spin drives are just fine. Depending on the resolution you'd like to see on your TV when connected to the home theater PC, you may or may not need a good video card. Enthusiasts may try and max out their video card budget, but I don't think that's necessary. Since we're not processing 3D, a standard video processor, which can be on board or in an APU, should be sufficient for your television. A more important discussion is what connections the TV has as compared to your video card. VGA, DVI, HDMI, DisplayPort. Be sure your home theater PC can push the maximum resolution that your TV supports. Bitcoin generation. This is a rather advanced example, but I thought it was good to include because of its unique hardware requirement. In short, Bitcoins are a virtual currency generated by having computers solve complex mathematical problems. I won't go into details about it too much, but the basic gist is Bitcoins require ridiculously fast processors to figure out these problems. GPUs, or graphics processing units, are actually the best at accomplishing this particular task. So in a Bitcoin system, you could easily skimp on all other devices and have a ridiculously fast graphics card. In fact, there are graphics cards specifically designed to process Bitcoin math. Alright, so we've looked at a few different tasks that would require different performance ratings for the different components in a system. I think this is an important subject because I feel that lots of folks who buy a computer don't necessarily understand how each component can affect the productivity of whatever they want to do with the computer. This gives a glimpse into that information and at the very least will give you a good guide when shopping for a pre-built computer as well as the parts for building your own computer.